Apparently, there's a religious cult group involved. They're called the Los Illuminados.
Los Illuminados? That's a mouthful.
Say whatever you please. Die, you worm!
Who were the Los Illuminados? Where did they come from? What was their history in this remote village region in Resident Evil 4? And where does the Las Plagas Parasite come into play with this mysterious neo-pagan cult? Well, these are the questions that arise while we play as Leon Kennedy as he tries to rescue the president's missing daughter. So follow me as we delve into the full history behind the Los Illuminados, explaining on how they took control of the local community, how they used the Las Plagas Parasite to achieve their goals, and how this was all propagated by his new leader, Osmund Saddler. So without any further ado, let's explain the terrifying truth about the Los Illuminados and the Las Plagas Parasite.
¿Qué carajo estás haciendo aquí? ¡Lárgate, cabrón!
Sorry to have bothered you.
The Los Illuminados, also known as the Illuminated or Enlightened Ones, has had a history that spans generations prior, with its central focus revolved around the pagan-like worship of the Plagas Parasite, with its members known to have used this plague-like organism to recruit new members into their cult. Though establishing its prominence in this remote village region in Europe, it quickly came to a screeching halt when its religion almost became extinct, which was caused by one of the ancestral family members of the Salazar family, known to be the Castellan of the large castle that oversaw the village population, who made it a point to eliminate this parasite worshipping cult. This was accounted for in one of the files found inside the Salazar castle, stating, "For many years, the Salazar family has served as Castellans of this castle. However, not everything is bright, for my ancestry has a dark past. Long ago, there once was a religious group that had deep roots in this region called the Los Illuminados. Unjustly, however, the first Castellan of the castle took away their rights and powers. As a follower of this religion and as the 8th Castellan, I felt that it was my duty as well as my responsibility to atone for that sin. I knew the best way to atone for that sin was to give power back to those who we once took it away from, the Los Illuminados. As expected, it took a little time, but we were able to rejuvenate the once sealed Las Plagas. With this success, I was one step closer to the revival of the Los Illuminados. The reason why I released the Las Plagas from deep under the castle and gave them to Lord Saddler was not only to repay for the sins of my ancestors, but I felt certain that the Lord would make better use of this power to help save the world, to save those that have sinned with the power of the Las Plagas, and to cleanse their souls, creating a world without sinners, the way it was meant to be. Once cleansed, they would become one of the many Ganados where they will find their reason to live. And after the Lord has succeeded in creating the world in which he has envisioned, then the sins of my Salazar family will be atoned for.
What a pleasant surprise.
This note comes directly from Ramon Salazar, the 8th and current Castellan of the castle, and member of the now revived Los Illuminados. And what's great about this note was a brief background on the cult and how the power of this religious group was contained by Ramon Salazar's ancestor. Though as we go on later in the video, we'll delve in more into the specifics on how the Los Illuminados lost their power and how the Las Plagas Parasite correlates with that. But with that said, we can still get some hints on how the followers of the Los Illuminados were dealt with by the first Castellan, with the image shown here tells us of a small story of those deemed part of the cult. And as we zoom in and see how the members of this religious group were burned on a stake and the rest were dealt with by the knights in the background. But even with this disturbing depiction of the Los Illuminados in the past and how cruelly they were dealt with, this part of the history in the village region wouldn't be seen as such a negative thing, because the current generation of the village population would account for the tale about the first Castellan and how he got rid of the Los Illuminados. This particular tale was told from one of the villagers' perspectives, whose name was Rodrigo. Here, he writes on this past history from a positive light, seeing the first Castellan as a folk hero who got rid of evil and maintained peace after his elimination of the Los Illuminados. This, of course, was carried on through time, with the consecutive generations reiterating this exact tale and how the first Castellan took charge against this Plaga worshipping cult. This in turn had the villagers revering the subsequent Castellans, while all except the most current being Ramon Salazar.
Say whatever you please.
with Rodrigo himself was known to have some reservations about the loss of the Salazar family. And to his credit, his hunch was right, because as the story goes with the villagers, it wouldn't be too long until this once peaceful and quiet village community be completely turned upside down. This all in part was due to the return of the Los Illuminados, Ramon Salazar's betrayal of his ancestors' past actions, and the resurrection of the Las Plagas Parasite.
Remember, if you become unpleasant to our eyes, you'll face severe consequences.
As noted previously by Rodrigo and his accounts about the past of the village and the overall region, the population as a whole lived a relatively peaceful life, going about their harvest seasons, with each member of the community doing their own part for the betterment of their neighbors and keeping their culture and estate away from the modern world, explaining why they seem to still retain the lifestyle of the olden days of the past, with most of the villagers' occupations revolves around farming and the transportations of their produce. This was only changed when suddenly there was a job of excavating the inner pits or ruins below the Salazar castle. Rodrigo noted how excited the other villagers were about this new occupation, but unfortunately for them, this would only be the start of the downfall of their community, because unbeknownst to them about the looming threat, they just still continued on about their day-to-day activities. And with their harvest season ending, this will give the villagers a chance to celebrate their year's hard work. Rodrigo writes on how this celebration ensues, with some playing their guitar and some reciting their poetry, though he did notice one person who was missing from all the festivities, who just so happened to be Father Bitorez Mendez, the village priest and de facto leader of this small community, though it was shrugged off, seeing as many church reasons could have kept Father Mendez from participating in this happy affair. But soon after, an important announcement would be shared in the next congregation, and to the surprise of the villagers, instead of Father Mendez helming the important announcement, he instead introduces Osmund Saddler. Here the villagers would be told of fantastic tales, ways of salvation, and a means of joining the Los Illuminados. The persuasion was made easier with the help of Father Mendez, since he was held in high regard by the community, and giving Osmund Saddler his blessing, most of the people in the congregation would be persuaded. And now, the next step in order to receive this new way of salvation, the villagers would have to be injected with an unknown substance, telling those who received this gift that their blood would be cleansed of sin. Also, it was made a point to persuade those who didn't receive this cleansing, and if persuasion wasn't enough, then force would be enacted. Well, it wouldn't be long until resistance from some of the villagers happens in regards to receiving this gift and joining the Los Illuminados. This led Rodrigo, who wholeheartedly was persuaded to join the Parasite Worshiping Cult, to believe that those who didn't receive this cleansing that they will never truly be happy. If anything, they were seen as sinful, and the only way to be cleansed from their sins was to join like the other villagers. And when some of those who resisted acted in anger, this was only seen as another reason that they needed cleansing to truly be happy. And amidst this mass conversion of the villagers, the previous belief that most of them had about the first Castellan and his heroic acts to eliminate the Los Illuminados was turned completely backwards, with the community led to believe that Los Illuminados' version of the folklore tale, stating that the first Castellan was actually envious of the religious group's righteousness. This then made the Castellan proceed to persecute those who were part of this Parasite Worshiping Cult. Rodrigo interpreted this change in story as truth, believing that the villagers had been told a lie for many generations, giving more credence to help persuade more of those who haven't received this gift from the Los Illuminados. Though, as mentioned before, if persuasion wasn't an effective means to convert the rest of the community, then the next necessary steps were initiated. It got so bad that even family members who refused the injection were forced into taking it. This then includes Rodrigo's own brother, who was forced into receiving this gift of salvation, which was depicted in this image here, with the villagers holding him down on the chair, forcing him to join their new religious cult. Then soon after, the whole village region would follow suit, being inoculated with this unknown substance. This of course includes children as well. But after all this, you'd think that life should have then continued on as normal for this
fine religious community.
Well, it wouldn't be too long until something started to happen to those who received the injection, with many villagers showing a variety of symptoms, starting with uncontrolled convulsions, who Rodrigo's own daughter suddenly started suffering from. Then it was followed up with his brother, who started to cough and vomit up blood. Rodrigo himself started to suffer extreme headaches, describing them as if his head would split apart. On top of this, he felt as though his whole body was boiling, and the pressure inside caused him to start to bleed out. These symptoms Rodrigo was going through would be experienced by the rest of the adults in the village, but unfortunately, or maybe even fortunately, the children wouldn't suffer the same fate as them. Instead, they would all be wiped out, leaving only the adults to suffer further with their ongoing side effects from their gift. With the ensuing days had Rodrigo just walking around aimlessly, not even eating, and just mumbling swear words that even surprised himself. Then the next call to action for the villagers came from Father Mendez. Here, he would give instructions to keep anyone from trespassing into the village. But oddly enough, Rodrigo and his fellow villagers interpreted this as instructions to kill anyone they deemed an outsider. Lastly, the final recollection from Rodrigo had him note that one of the villagers' headache symptoms proceeded to the next stage, with that villager's head split wide open, exposing the Plagas parasite that was brewing inside his body. Rodrigo sees this as a miracle and then proceeds on to continue his worship as a Los Illuminado.
Surely you don't think I'm the same as those diminutive Ganados.
As previously mentioned, the Las Plagas parasite would be the central focus of worship by the Los Illuminados, and now as we know that the injections given to the villagers were samples from this parasite, leading them to grow inside those who received them as a gift. Well, now it's time to explain the many aspects to this parasite, where this plague came from, or more specifically, how they came back after generations of being sealed off by the first Castellan, which we can begin with this note here, reading, "The first Castellan buried the Las Plagas deep underground below the castle to hide their very existence. But when Salazar released the Las Plagas, no one thought he could bring them back to life, because when Salazar found them, they were all just fossilized remains. Everyone knew that the parasitic organism could not survive without their host, that they couldn't sustain life on their own. But when Salazar and his men excavated the remains, it almost appeared as if the Las Plagas were just waiting to be discovered so they could resurrect. Several years later, unexplainable convulsions started occurring among the villagers who helped with the excavation of the Las Plagas. Then one day, all of a sudden, these villagers turned into violent savages. They later found out it was caused by the Las Plagas. Although they appeared fossilized, they were able to survive the long years by lying in a dormant state at the cellular level, remaining in a spore-like form. Apparently, during the excavation, the villagers inhaled the spores, and within their bodies, the parasites became active again. This is how the Las Plagas were resurrected. Even as I'm writing, the excavation of the Las Plagas continues. God only knows how many of these Plagas have been resurrected, not to mention the countless number of Ganados that have been created. Their inhumane activity must be put to an end. If they are not stopped, people around the world could turn into victims of this crazy cult organization.
Something's happened to the people here.
This file only reinforces the previous recollection from Rodrigo's point of view, where he mentions the new occupation of excavating the area below the Salazar castle, and how this region was quickly inoculated with the Las Plagas parasite. The end results were the many Ganados, Zealots, and the other monstrous boss creatures we encountered in Resident Evil 4. But what was truly terrifying about this parasitic organism is the social aspect that it displays to those infected with it. This was made evident at the very start, showing those infected with a Plagas parasite to still be able to think in a high enough cognitive capacity, where speech was still fully intact, strategizing, coordination, and many other normal behaviors were displayed. But the most important function to those infected with the Las Plagas is the complete devotion they showed to those infected with a dominant plaga, because it's revealed that as many as there were infected with this parasite, there were some few who had received a dominant version of this organism. This in turn allowed those with a dominant plaga inside them to command those of lower ranking to do their bidding, even if it meant resulting into their demise. And speaking of those with the dominant plaga inside them, this constituted some of the main antagonists of this game, which includes Bitorez Mendez, Ramon Salazar, Jack Krauser, and of course the leader of the Los Illuminados, Osmund Saddler, with each of these individuals showing their own version of mutation from this parasite. But the interesting aspect in terms of the social control of these dominant plaga-retaining individuals was the method of how the parasites inside them control the lower ranks. This was noted in one of the files done by Ada Wong, where it states the Salazar family, Castellan's 4 generations, possess the ability to control the Las Plagas. The organization's hypothesis is that a unique frequency of sonic waves sensed only by the parasite is used to control them. The same principle is used in a dog whistle. This was inferred through the analysis of a tissue sample we retrieved. The tissue contained an organ presumably used for sensing sound waves. I've seen cult members carrying ceremonial rods, and I wonder if they emit these sounds. Of course, this is purely theoretical. Though as it stands, this theory that Ada had about the Plagas is only substantiated with Osmund Saddler himself, because as the leader of the Los Illuminados, it's safe to assume that the dominant Plaga inside him is at the very apex of the Parasite family. And also, as mentioned in Ada's note, that ceremonial rod that Saddler carries around with him could be emitting these special sound waves as well, allowing him the ability to manipulate even those with the dominant Plaga. This could explain how he was such an influence to Ramon Salazar and Bitorez Mendez.
My boy Salazar will make sure you follow the same fate.
Which indirectly had both these individuals control the Ganados or Zealots below them, hence in the end, used both of these individuals to conquer this remote area we played in Resident Evil 4. Also, another important aspect we need to cover with the Las Plagas is the research that was conducted by Dr. Luis Serra and his discoveries about the parasite, which some of the information that he lays out only further substantiates what we've already covered from this video. With a plethora of files he had, summarizes some of his many findings, which it reads, there are some parasites that have the ability to control their host. It's basic knowledge among biologists, but not much is known as to how the parasites do it. Studying these parasites specifically might reveal some clues as to how the powers of the Las Plagas work, and perhaps provide more insight on the victims of the Las Plagas, the Los Ganados. Number 1, as mentioned previously, the Plagas have the ability to manipulate the behavioral patterns of their host. Number 2, the Plagas are social organisms. By this I mean that instead of living individually, they live in perfect social harmony. It is believed that they have a collective intelligence. This type of behavior can be seen among insects such as bees and ants. However, this kind of social behavior is rarely seen among parasitic organisms. Perhaps it was a learned behavior by the Plagas. I'm finding out if this has any relationship with their first characteristic. Number 3, the Plagas have exceptional adaptive skills. They are able to live off many kinds of organisms by creating a symbiotic environment quickly. This ability, when combined with their social behaviors, allows them to interact intelligently between hosts regardless of the host organism. I am ashamed to admit that my pure fascination with the Plagas, in hindsight, has blinded me to the true research objectives of the Los Illuminados. Even with the knowledge that Saddler was going to abuse the results of these experiments, I could not pull myself away from my research. As a result, I am just as responsible for this whole mess as he is. I see now that I was wrong, but can I stop their evil plans alone?
Stay with me, Louis.
I am a researcher, hired by Saddler. He found out what I was up to.
Don't talk.
Here. It should suppress growth of the parasite. The sample. Saddler took it. You have to get it back.
So even though initially Luis Serra aided the Los Illuminados, some of the research he's conducted had some ways of mitigating the properties of the Las Plagas. This included the medication he gave both to Leon and Ashley that would suppress the growth of the Plagas inside them in some capacity. Not only that, he's documented many findings that shows both the strengths and weaknesses of this parasite, with some of the strengths as he noted would be the amazing adaptive abilities of this organism, allowing itself to attach to the host, but was able to navigate in a way that could help further spread the parasitic strain through social and ecological means. Examples are the Ganados and the use of their social skills and force to infect the Plagas into their victims. And to supplement this, Luis does cover the accounts of other species being used as hosts for the Plagas' further propagation, which here he notes, Dacrocilium. Once the larvae of this parasite migrates to the ant's esophagus, it alters the behavior of the ant. When the temperature drops in the evening, the infected ant climbs to the top of a plant and clamps onto a leaf using its mandible. It stays there immobile until the next morning, placing the ant where it's most vulnerable to be eaten by a browsing herbivore, such as sheep. One could conclude that the parasite is manipulating the host's behavior to its way into the body of its definitive host. Galactosomum. The larvae of this parasite makes its home inside the brain of a fish such as the yellowtail and the parrot bass. Once infected, the fish make their way up to the water surface, where they'll swim until eaten by seabirds. Once again, the peculiar behavior can be explained by the parasite's desire to get into the bodies of the seabirds. Leucochloridium. This parasite's sporocysts develop in the snail's tentacles. The sporocysts are vivid in color and pulsate continually, somewhat like a worm. Surprisingly, the infected snail makes its way to the top of a plant, where it's most visible to the eyes of birds, therefore more likely to be eaten. Once eaten by a bird, the parasite will complete its metamorphosis into an adult. Lastly, one of the most important research findings Luis Serra made was the possibility of the removal of the Las Plagas parasite from a host, even when it has already grown substantially. Here, Luis mentions this account of his research while still under the employment of the Los Illuminados, stating, "From the initial stages of the research, we have been searching for a safe and practical removal procedure of the plaga. Ironically, it turns out that the real objective of this research was not to find a way to remove the plagas from the infected persons, but to find a way so the plaga could not be removed from the body easily. In the end, we were able to find out that the plagas could be removed only by exposing them to a special radiation. The only drawback with this method is that it is a very painful procedure. Since the plaga attaches itself to the nerves, there is a possibility that it may impair the consciousness of the host. Another fact that must be mentioned is that once the plaga grows into an adult, the removal procedure could kill the host, but perhaps death isn't so bad when you think about the alternative."
Leon, what's gonna happen to us?
And you know what? That alternative is definitely not a viable way to live, because these Ganados, zealots, or higher-ranking cultists infected with the plaga have shown a variety of stages in terms of maturity of the parasite inside them, with the early stages showing these enemies to still conduct themselves in a normal decorum, but obviously in a very hostile manner to those they deem an outsider. The next stage is the reveal of the parasite through the host's head, which was only possible once the plaga inside has reached an adult level. This becomes more prevalent as we continue on further in the storyline in RE4, as the plagas continue to evolve in the process, which we can begin with these examples here.
Leon, are you okay?
Then step by step, the parasite becomes more developed and in the end allows the plagas to be able to survive even outside the host. But with that said, we can counter the plagas easily once exposed to the outside using a flash grenade. This could be seen as a microcosm similar to the radiation used to kill an adult plaga inside the host. But in the end, the Los Illuminados' focus of worshipping this parasite has definitely cultivated many variations of the strain, resulting in the many aspects that made the plaga so potent when used by the wrong person. So powerful that the social and mind control aspect of this parasite would be the main focus point in the Los Illuminados' plan to cleanse the world.
No longer will the United States think they can police the world forever.
The real power of the United States lies in three areas: the Justice Department, the administrative bodies, and the military. In order to take control of these areas, we must influence the minds of the people who advise the president. After this is done, the rest of the departments will quickly fall under our sway. If by chance the United States were to figure out our plan, the damage caused should be minimal. We will be able to conquer the country as planned using our backup plan. Once we control the country, we will use their international influence to our advantage. The rest of the world will fall swiftly. As already stated, if our first plan doesn't go as smoothly as expected, we'll proceed with our secondary plan. By sending in our special forces, we will infiltrate the country from within. Fear and chaos will spread through the nation like a virus. It'll only be a matter of time before the country loses its stability. At that time, when they're most vulnerable, we will strike. Rejoice, my brethren, the world shall soon be cleansed. The passage that we just read is the main goal of the Los Illuminados. All the steps taken by Osmund Saddler would be necessary to achieve his ideal world state, and in the main storyline in RE4, the very first step to achieve this goal was to gain some type of leverage against the United States. This came in the form of kidnapping Ashley Graham, the president's daughter. The results of this caused an immediate scramble within the US government. A file dedicated to this situation was noted here, which it reads, name Ashley Graham, age 20, daughter of the United States President. She was kidnapped by an unidentified group while on her way home from her university. The kidnappers' motives are still unknown, although there's reliable information that the perpetrator is an insider. Only a handful of people know about this kidnapping. It's been kept under wraps mostly due to the fact that we can't determine who the traitor is. The guys in intelligence say they have reliable information that Ashley's been sighted somewhere in Europe, but until we find out who the insider is, I don't know what to believe. It could be a ploy. We have very few leads as to the whereabouts of Ashley, but members of the Secret Service and everyone else related to Ashley are being questioned by an investigative team. Even active agents are being investigated for any information. It's just a matter of time before the kidnapper is exposed.
You're the one who kidnapped Ashley.
This suspicion of an insider was highly accurate because it was Jack Krauser, a former US government operative and colleague of Leon, who was the culprit that kidnapped Ashley, and the reasonings for this was to gain Osmund Saddler's full trust and to be part of the inner circles within the cultist group. So with this accomplished, the next step for the Los Illuminados was to infect Ashley with the Las Plagas, wait for it to mature enough that Saddler would be able to control her using the social aspect of this parasite that we previously covered, and use her, being the president's daughter, as one of the many influencing factors that could sway the US government into the Los Illuminados' goals. Also, another important facet to the Illuminados' plans was to make sure that the Las Plagas were at the apex of their biological capacity. This is where Dr. Luis Serra's research comes into play, resulting into the Plagas' many variant effects that could help propagate its species. This comes in the form of the many monsters that the Los Illuminados have created to help achieve their goals, with some noteworthy monsters were the El Gigante, the Regenerators, and the other various enemies we've seen in this game. Even a Queen Plaga was established to help procreate more of these enhanced bioengineered parasites. Though even with all the steps taken by Saddler and the many leaps he's made to further his goals, all the other miscellaneous storylines and dealings in the shadows kept him from achieving his plans. These factors came from Leon's mission to save Ashley and rid of the Plagas and the Los Illuminados. Second was Jack Krauser and his plans to infiltrate this religious cult at the behest of Albert Wesker and for
Umbrella's sake. Umbrella.
Third was Ada Wong and her objective to steal the samples of the Plagas parasite and send it back to her employer, who was just known as the Organization, leading her to play a role that manipulated Leon, Krauser, and even Wesker himself. These entangled missions resulted in the failure of the Los Illuminados' goals and the downfall of Osmund Saddler himself, hence finally destroying this parasite worshipping cult.
You've acquired this power. You too will understand.
Guess it's another good reason to get the parasite out of my body.
So before we end this video, I'd like to share an interesting story addition that was made in regards to the Las Plagas parasite and how all this came to be during Resident Evil 3 Remake, because an interview conducted involving the director for RE3 Remake, Kiyohiko Sakata, confirmed this new version's inspiration for the NE Alpha parasite, the same parasite that helped create the sentient tyrant Nemesis from that game. Here, Kiyohiko Sakata makes a statement in regards to the NE Alpha parasite and how the Las Plagas connects with this added lore within the context of RE3 Remake, which he states, quote, "We inevitably decided on this final ability due to the presence of Ganado in Resident Evil 4. Ganado are humanoid enemies that are created through being infected with a Plagas parasite, the original basis for NE Alpha. When the Plagas activates, it spawns from the neck of its host in a form of a tentacle. NE Alpha was created to imitate this parasitic quality. We wanted NE Alpha infected enemies to be visually similar to the Plagas infected Ganados, as a means for fans to piece together how Nemesis fits within the whole Resident Evil franchise. While this was the design and background for Nemesis in this reimagining of Resident Evil 3, we should note that Nemesis was not designed with this in mind in the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. End quote. This small addition to the lore from RE3 Remake helps connect the upcoming Resident Evil 4 Remake story to the main plotline in some capacity, because this was something that was missing when RE4 first released in the mid-2000s, with the main storyline at that time within Resident Evil revolved around the Umbrella Corporation and the many viruses made by them. So with the release of Resident Evil 4 at that time, the story change of using a new cult to be the main villainous organization, and the use of a different catalyst, the Las Plagas Parasite, as a means of replacement for Umbrella's many viruses really made RE4 feel isolated in the grand scheme of the storyline within the Resident Evil franchise. Though with that information provided by RE3 Remake director Kiyohiko Sakata, the upcoming RE4 Remake could change that notion, allowing this new remake, or reimagining as they call it, to be connected in many ways to the main storyline of the series that previously wasn't available at that time for the original Resident Evil 4. But with that said, only time will tell on how much of these new additional lore changes will be made in RE4 Remake, and how these changes tie in with the central overarching plotline of the mainline series. Though in the end, this definitely is a very welcome addition to the lore set for Resident Evil 4 Remake. And you know what? This change only sets up the foundation for the terrifying truth about the Los Illuminados and the Las Plagas Parasite for that game. Anyways, what were your thoughts about this Parasite Worshiping Cult? Did you guys like their addition to the RE lore? And what were your opinions on the Las Plagas Parasite as a whole? Please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Also, if you guys enjoyed the content, then please feel free to like and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Anyways, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, you guys have a great rest of your day, and this is DeVuH, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Give me your number when I get back.
May I remind you that you're still on duty?
Story of my life.